So today I'm going to show you how I did this. The design is not interesting, right? This design is just as a demonstration of alignment. But what this is an example of aligning features on both the front and back of a piece of material. So this piece of wood, I cut this one side and then the other side. And you can see that the alternating dashes in the horizontal and vertical lines were cut on different sides. So on this side, you can see the scorch marks, the 1/3, 3rd, and 5th lines, or dashes or whatever, were cut on this side. And then on this side, you can see from the scorch marks that the 0th, the 2nd, the 4th, and the 6th were cut on this side. So I'll show you how I did that. It's a technique very similar to previous registration pin techniques, where you use registration pins to sort of force everything to be in the same place, but with some slightly more complicated things you have to make sure that you do in order to align everything correctly. This flip technique requires you to make 4 different components in your vector editor. The first is a pair of appropriately sized circles for cutting the registration pin holes. Their specific orientation and placement isn't important, but for simplicity's sake, I align them vertically and separate them to place the design between them. This pair of holes will be cut into your stock. The second is a copy of the registration pin holes, together with a bounding box that we'll use to position everything in the laser cutter. The pin holes in the bounding box should be center aligned with each other on the axis you intend to flip them on. I generally use both vertical and horizontal centering, so there's less room for error. This component will be used to create the jig. The third component is the first side of your design, inside a copy of the bounding box. The design in bounding box must also be centered on the flip axis. The fourth component is the second side of your design, and another bounding box similarly centered on the flip axis. To now engrave your design, the first step is to cut the registration pin holes on your stock with the first component. Then use the second component to cut registration pin holes in a scrap piece of material. When you're done, don't change where the origin is. This is now your jig. Next, place side 1 of your stock onto the jig and fix it in place with the registration pins and engrave side 1, which is component 3. Then flip it and re-register and engrave side 2 with component 4. When you're doing this kind of cut, 2 things are very important. Number 1, you can see there's a lot of magnets here holding the spoil board or the jig to the bed. It's very important that the jig doesn't move. If it moves, then the registration holes will also move, and you won't be able to realign things. The other thing is that when you cut these holes, when you cut the registration holes, you will have your laser cutter origin somewhere on this board. And it's okay to move the cutting head, but you should never change the origin once you've defined it for these holes, because the subsequent cuts, the cuts that you make for this, need to start at the same spot because you're using the frame of this piece, or at least that's what I did. You're using a frame to ensure that everything inside of that frame is positioned correctly. And so if you move the origin, again, you won't line things up correctly. So you need to make sure that once you set the origin, you don't change it. And you use the same origin position for the registration holes in the jig and also the registration holes in your part. This little clip doesn't really explain anything so much as it shows the impact of flipping on different axes. So the first flip here is vertical, so that you're flipping along the horizontal axis, so you're flipping vertically. And then the second one flips horizontally,
so you're flipping along the vertical axis. Another thing that this shows, though it doesn't really show it directly, is that you can actually cut the registration pin holes into your stock at the same time that you cut side one. Those two things don't actually have to be separate. You just need to make sure that the registration pin holes end up on side one of your stock. And that's what I used here, actually. I cut the A side with both the design and the registration pin holes all in one fell swoop. And so there actually was only one first step. I only had one component. And once that was done, I then cut the holes in the jig